The purpose of this video is just to give you an overview of the context that you need to know for all of your texts for component 1. I'm just going to start reading them from the top, so if you want to make notes, please do, because this is going to be coming at you pretty quickly today. So the first text is in your advertising module, and it's tied. So tied's a really nice, easy text to look at in terms of its context. Basically, you just need to be aware of the post-war issues that women faced. So during the Second World War, women were asked to go into the workplace very quickly to make up for all the men who disappeared off to fight the war. And then right afterwards, the men came back, the ones who survived came back and basically asked the women to go back into the home so that they could have their jobs back. Now this caused issues, obviously, because women didn't want to go back into the home. So a lot of our media focused on trying to cultivate women back into the home, and you saw a lot of like propaganda style images. So tied is one of these propaganda style images where it really kind of creates this representation that women should be housewives and mothers. So the idealised representation on the tied poster that was created by Darcy, Macias, Benton and Bowles shows an idealised female representation of a housewife. Another context you need to be aware of is the economic boom that the world was going through right after the war. So there's a lot more money all of a sudden, so people were buying new houses and new products, and a lot of kind of things like washing machines were being invented, and obviously you need detergent to go in them. So women were being sold to a lot of the time, and there was a new load of commodities that were there designed to help people's lives be a lot easier. Finally, just the fact that this advert looks so mental when you compare it to everyday adverts that we see today. There is a lot of copy on this thing. There is tons and tons of writing, and that basically comes down to the economic context of people hadn't quite worked out how to advertise yet. Kiss of the Vampire is also a very easy text to work out in terms of its context. Very easy text. We've moved on a decade from where Tide was, and we've moved into the 1960s now, when the women's liberation movement and the sexual revolution were happening. The sexual revolution came about because the pill was now free on the NHS, and the Abortion Act was about to be introduced. And what this meant was that women were now free to do a lot more sexy times with whoever they wanted to do without a lot of the risks like getting pregnant. And if you did have a pregnancy, you could terminate it provided it was done by a doctor, which seems fairly common sense to me, that if you were going to get an abortion, you'd want a doctor to do it and not just some geezer. So basically, the context are nice and easy with this, that this sexual revolution was happening. So we get very sexualized representations of women on the front cover. The ladies are wearing very revealing costumes, and this ties in nicely with the male gaze and Laura Mulvey. To add to that, we also have the fact that the women's liberation movement was happening, and this was a scary time for men. So because women were becoming much more powerful, what we tended to see was representations of powerful women. So our vampire here, for example, is a very powerful lady, but also very frightening and has a male under her control. And this reflects the cultural context of more powerful women moving into society in that time. Tying in with the idea of sexism within this, we also have the star billing at the bottom, which reels off 3 men's names before we get to the 1 female name on the whole cover. Now that doesn't quite make sense given that there's 2 females and 2 males on the front cover and 5 names mentioned at the bottom, and 4 of them names are guys. As far as economic context go, this thing was produced by Hammer House of Horrors, and so it has the seal of quality there where it says a Hammer film production, and it also has a universal release on it as well. And these are both seals of quality. Do remember this film was intended to be a sequel to Dracula, because Dracula was so successful, so that's an economic context as well. I mean, they didn't ever talk about Dracula in the film because it was rubbish, so nobody went to see it. Everyone's favourite text, WaterAid is next, and WaterAid is a nice easy one as well. So the basic context around this is that we have been seeing charity adverts since the 1980s. So in 1984 we had Do They Know It's Christmas Time. Right after that we had Live Aid, and Live Aid was the big concert where all of your dad's favourite bands played to try and raise money for the Ethiopian famine. Since that time there's been a lot of codes and conventions around media text designed to raise money for charity. So we often see themes of like a voiceover, and then we'll have images that are really upsetting, so starving children with distended bellies and things like that. We'll see what Alvarado called the pitied stereotype in our representations in these adverts as well. And all of this stuff became convention, so much so that audiences became desensitized to it. So we changed the channel. We don't necessarily watch these things when they're coming on. We'll go make cups of tea, we'll check our phones, we'll do anything but watch them because we don't feel as sad anymore, and that is really sad in itself. So what Atomic London did was they started a new campaign called the Rain for Good campaign. This WaterAid advert was a big part of it. So what they did was they flipped everything on its head. Stephen Neal talks about repetition and difference, and WaterAid went for the difference here. Try to do something completely different with their advert. So what they did was they made an advert that showed very happy African people, and it was kind of trying to show off all the good work that WaterAid actually did. So Claudia is not designed to be pitied. We're supposed to feel really happy when we see Claudia and see the good that our money has done. To add to this is the economic context around this text. So the economic context are the fact that this is an online only advert. You can't see it on the TV. It was only hosted on their YouTube channel, and it was shared through their Twitter channel and other social medias through the hashtag #ShareSunshine. You have no idea how many times I had to re-record that to say that correctly. So #ShareSunshine, I'm getting good, was used to help get some two-step flow going, so you could talk about Lazarsfeld there. They also used the economic context of texting in. Text Sunny to 70555 was a good example of how society has moved on, how economic contexts are being used. Now obviously putting it online and having it as an online only advert made sure that them guys didn't have to spend a lot of money. So WaterAid did not have to spend a lot of money airing this on TV, and all the money can now kind of go towards the charity rather than actually advertising the charity in the first place. And finally, there's the song choice is another big kind of context around this text. So Zoe in 1991 released Sunshine on a Rainy Day. And that was when I was a young lad. Now the audience who heard that first time round are they're in the 30s to the 40s. So people around that age now are having kids, and so may be able to personally identify with the plight that Claudia's going through. We may feel like we kind of like want to mother her or father her, obviously, if you're a guy. And so what this means is that we're more likely to text Sunny to 70555. Straight Outta Compton is our next text. So this one focuses just on industry. You only need to be aware of industries and media context. So basically the context are around the fact that both of the big companies that were involved in this, which is Universal Studios and Legendary Pictures, both of them companies are owned by massive conglomerates, and therefore this text was not particularly risky to make. So Universal are owned by Comcast, who also own Interscope Records, who produce a lot of NWA's music and own a lot of NWA's music. So they make money left, right and centre with the release of this film. They also signed Dre, who released Compton, which was his first kind of album in about 14 years. So the synergy between these different texts made a lot of money for Comcast. Equally, we need to be aware of Legendary Pictures, who are owned by this massive Chinese conglomerate called the Wonder Group. So the Wonder Group and Comcast were both making a lot of money off of this film. It cost $50 million to make this thing, but we worked out that between them, they're worth about $4 billion. In terms of their revenue. So this was not particularly risky. You also tie in the fact that this film is a biopic that's made about one of the most successful rap groups of all time, and you can see why this thing was not particularly risky. Tie in the fact that Dre himself and Ice Cube were both producers, and this kind of gives a new spin to everything. So there's synergy going on everywhere, right? Because Dre and Cube can promote it, and Dre also has like limited edition beats coming out and also has an album coming out, and so is advertising between all of these different products all at once and making this film super successful. And it was super successful because it made $200 million, so it made 4 times as much as it cost to make and distribute. Now take into consideration that Dre, Cube and Eazy-E's widow, Tomika Wright, are all producers on this film, suggests that this film is going to show these people very favourably, and it did. So for example, it cut out the part where Dre beat up that woman, because that definitely happened. It's regulated for both the British audiences through the BBFC and through American audiences through the MPAA, and so like it's been regulated really tightly so as not to show anything too kind of graphic to get itself banned. But at the same time, you've got to remember that the cultural context around this is really, really horrible when you think about it. So a lot of it focuses around Compton in the 1980s and the 1990s, and we are aware of people like Rodney King and the LA riots of 1992. All of this is shown, and it's all shown from a certain perspective. So it's shown quite frequently to be like an anti-police message, and this again is part of the context. So the anti-police message comes from the fact that NWA have a lot of songs that are very anti-police, And also, you've got to remember that the producers are very anti-police as well, because, you know, they kept getting arrested all the time for just, you know, being black outside of a recording studio. On the topic of black music, we might as well talk about Formation by Beyonce. So Formation is another nice easy one. It concerns a lot of black representations, and the biggest context or the biggest question around this whole thing is, yes, this thing has a lot of messages about black rights and that kind of thing, and about black representation, but it is still a music video, so it is still part of capitalism. And is this thing just designed to make music? Is it exploiting these black representations? I'm not going to decide for you. It's up to you guys to kind of have that argument with yourself. So we need to be aware that Formation was directed by Melina Matsoukas, that took a few times to say that properly too, who is a black woman. And obviously Beyonce was one of the producers on this music video, and therefore you get a lot of positive representations of black ladies. You do, however, also get a lot of negative representations of the way black people have been treated throughout history. So there are references to antebellum and the antebellum era, which is around the transatlantic slave trade. And there's also references to Hurricane Katrina, where the US government was really criticised for the fact that they did not respond well to looking after black people in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina hit. All of these references to Black Lives Matter and things like that are all kind of in a response to the new far-right movement that we're getting, especially in America. So it's all a response to this new kind of political divide that we're seeing in America. In fact, you know what? It's not even a new divide. It's been happening for 400 years now. It's just that now we have social media to highlight it a lot more. So things like police brutality come into play with the Stop Shooting Us thing. These are all societal and cultural contexts, references to Black Lives Matter, references to black women being in formation. This is all context that's really, really good for this module. And on the theme of independent, strong women, we're going to talk about Lauren Laverne and Late Night Woman's Hour. So really, we don't need to know too much about the context here, basically. There's a couple of context. One of them is gender-based. So remember, this show is a cool version of another show, if you can imagine that. This show is a version of a program called Woman's Hour that was set up in the 1940s and was often kind of criticised for being tokenistic. In 2016, the BBC was again kind of embroiled in a scandal about gender pay gaps. So it turned out that women at the BBC were being paid nowhere near the same as their male counterpart. And so, in the theme of tokenism, they launched Late Night Woman's Hour and also suggested that there will be no more male panels at the BBC. So if you're going to have a panel show, it has to have at least one lady on it now. The other context with this is just the fact that it exists on the BBC. So I know from talking to you guys that for some reason you didn't enjoy Late Night Woman's Hour. Nobody enjoys Late Night Woman's Hour, and this is why they're showing it so late on the BBC. So it airs once a month on a Sunday at 11 PM. So no one really is awake to listen to it. But what it does is it ticks a box and says we are now creating programs for women, which is part of what the Royal Charter suggests the BBC has to do. And also you need to remember that the economic context of the fact that the BBC don't have to chase big audiences at all. The BBC are funded by the licence fee and can therefore make whatever they want. Remember when we watched that Matt Berry thing and how mental that was, where he was just doing voiceovers of monkeys? No one's watching that either, but the BBC can afford to do that kind of thing. Remember that all BBC programmes are guided by the BBC's Reithian principles of inform, educate and entertain, and Late Night Woman's Hour does all of these things. And yet again, on the theme of strong women, we have Evelyn de Grandpré, who is our avatar that we play as in Assassin's Creed Liberation. So one of the biggest contexts is a historical one. It's about how video games have changed since the 1950s. If you can believe it, graphics have got a lot better. We are now connected online, so can play with other people, and video gaming has become a social thing. Blum, the Brown and McQuail. And also we can now play portably, and this is part of the economic context too. So Sony were facing a lot of competition from mobile gaming and tablet gaming, and Nintendo, because Nintendo released the Nintendo DS, which was obviously their portable entry into video gaming. So Sony had to throw something out there to try and combat this. So they took one of the biggest franchises that they have, Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed, and they made a exclusive title for the PS Vita and released it on the PS Vita, which just didn't do very well. Now, on the theme of franchises, Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed franchise has been running for a long time now, and it's become hugely successful because franchises always do. A lot of the economic context is just at the fact that Assassin's Creed games tend to be the same, but there's this huge audience of people who like them and who will buy them just because they are Assassin's Creed games. It's really hard for a franchise to fail. Because their texts are all really popular, because there's this seal of quality around the text. And of course, another big thing about this, another big context, was the fact that we have a female avatar for the first time, a female protagonist in an Assassin's Creed game. You have had the choice to play as women before, but you've never been forced into just playing as a girl in these games before. You've always had a choice. And what's more is the representation of Evelyn is fairly positive. She's not sexually exploited in any way, she's not sexually designed, she's also black, and this clearly shows progression throughout our society and how equality in video games seems to be happening more frequently now. And finally, for AS level component 1, another strong independent lady, we got the Statue of Liberty. We're obviously talking about the mirror and the context around that. So the biggest kind of societal context was the fact that nobody could imagine Donald Trump winning the election. There are videos of people laughing at the fact that he was even running for president. So it was really unexpected. We thought Hillary was going to win, so this was like the shock election edition, and we have loads of semiology that suggests that even the Statue of Liberty was a bit devastated when he won, to be honest with you. This comes from the fact that the Mirror is run by left-wing editors, so it's a left-wing newspaper with left-wing audiences, but it is owned by Reach PLC, who are a giant conglomerate. They reach 45 million people per month, so they are a giant publishing conglomerate, and they have a range of different ideologies within their newspapers. They are horizontally integrated, which means that they are really kind of like risk-free, so they can pretty much do what they want and not really worry about going bust at this stage. And they put forward a lot of different viewpoints from a lot of different political perspectives. On the article that's inside, it talks about America's Brexit. So again, there's cultural connotations around the use of the term Brexit for British audiences. And we also need to be aware of the technological changes in the newspaper industry. So in your exam, you will also need to know about the homepage for the Mirror, and you'll also need to know about at least 2 online articles about the Mirror, and I got you guys to find them. You need to talk about things like citizen journalism, the advancements in technology, the fact that everything can be archived now, the fact that online news now provides a bigger kind of spectrum for people to get their news from, and the fact that it's free and therefore they need to chase pretty much all the advertising they can online through their websites. As a final thing on this, we could talk about news values and the fact that one man has been elected president seems to be more important news than 7 people killed in a tram crash. Okay, so I haven't covered anywhere near all the context that you guys are going to need to know, and it's in nowhere near enough detail, so you guys need to be revising, but this video is a good place to start. So make sure that you've made notes on this thing, and I'll do another video for the second years for their component 1 context as well. But this one can obviously be applied to both second and first year, because all these texts apply to both second and first year. I hope you found this useful. If you have, then I will happily make some more for you, because you know, I want you guys to do well. So make sure you're doing your revision, keep up to date with everything, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video.